Before we start today's episode, a bit of housekeeping for all those wonderful listeners out there. Whichever your podcast listening platform of choice, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, reviews can make a huge difference. So not only do I hugely value your feedback, which can help me create better content, but it also helps others discover the podcast. So if you could leave a review, that would be fabulous. And with that, on with today's show. I'm the Reverend Dr. Jenny McKay, veterinarian and minister in secular employment, environmentalist, activist, and self-confessed cat junkie. But believe it or not, I have never been jailed for trying to save humanity, to quote LBC radio presenter James O'Brien. Incredibly, today's guest, Mark Coleman, has. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
I think there's only one place to begin today's show, really. And it's certainly got plenty of media attention with Gary Lineker, Chris Packham, and as mentioned, James O'Brien condemning the verdict on you. So you are a retired vicar from Rochdale and you were arrested at the Bishopsgate Junction during a peaceful 2-hour climate change protest. So for those who haven't been following the story, could you tell me what happened and what specifically you were protesting against?
Well, back in October 2021, it was maybe week 7 or week 8 of the Insulate Britain actions. And we had been sitting on motorways, you may remember. And then latterly we came into to London itself and sat on some roads there. So I was one of about 30 plus people who sat across various roads around Bishopsgate in the city of London. And that led to an arrest, but not usually when you sit on a road, you get arrested for willful obstruction of the highway, abbreviated as WOO for short. But here we got charged with the much more serious offence of public nuisance. And that led to a Crown Court trial in January this year, with the sentencing a few months later, which led me to prison. But that's the short story.
Yeah, but I don't think you really were being a significant nuisance, though.
Well, you're very kind, and we certainly agree with you. We weren't, but the judge was very keen that the jury only thought about things in a very narrow way. Maybe that's right. Not for me to disagree with the judge. Indeed, if we did disagree with the judge and speak beyond what he permitted us to say, we would have been charged with contempt of court and gone straight to prison. So he only wanted to hear about the number of buses on the road and how long the delays were. We couldn't talk about the more serious disruption of a collapsing climate, economy, floods. That sort of disruption was not relevant, was inadmissible. And that's what we eventually began to protest about. Some of us did manage to get off some of the trials. We were done in about batches of 4. There are about 2 or 3 acquittals, because the jury could see why people had acted. And I think that's what we hoped would happen with our trial, but it didn't.
And I think I read somewhere that you're actually not allowed to use certain words in your defense, like climate change. Is that correct?
Oh yes, there was certainly couldn't mention the C word, climate change, and we weren't even allowed to talk about some of the stories that were quite inspiring, some of those civil rights stories. Yes. Particularly the one about the Freedom Riders, where they'd got black and white people together and got on buses and gone to the Deep South and they'd then been beaten up, but yes, gradually their sort of non-violent resistance and sacrifice had led to quite a lot of change in attitudes and eventually political action. So that's why we were acting, not just to be a nuisance, but to be part of a process of change, a loving intervention for humanity to wake us all up.
Yeah. And you've certainly set a very, very good example. Oh. But could you tell me about your experiences at Thameside Prison? How did you get on with the other inmates? And wonder what they thought about your arrest.
Well, the inmates were very welcoming and helpful, and it was not the terrible experience you may imagine it to be. It's not like in the movies. Everybody's suffering the same sort of struggle in prison, and so you help each other. So that was good. And when I arrived, I went into the induction wing, and I was on my own for a few days, which was probably quite good because it gave me a bit of time to uh, de-stress, as it were. And then I shared a cell with somebody who had a bit more experience than me, and he helped me out. And he called me the old man because he was telling the guards that he was doing a very important job looking after this old man. Uh, but I quite like being the old man. But yeah, I mean, prison and getting there is full of all sorts of degrading moments, where you're
Mm.
put in one of those little cells inside a van, and you're processed, and then you're held in a holding room, and your whole body is x-rayed, and you have to put on the prison clothes. But everybody has that, and it is a bit absurd putting us in jail when we're trying to save life. But I made the most of it, and I was grateful for the support and friendship of the prisoners, who were amused, I think, sometimes to have a vicar in prison, and gave us plenty of chance to explain why we were there and the science of it all.
So a lot of good people in that environment to speak to, I guess.
Oh yes, lots of good people, and the prison staff,
Yes.
Who seemed very young to me, but I think that's the nature of when you're 64, everybody looks younger.
And that was your nickname, wasn't it? The old man.
Well, I think this is becoming a bit of an urban myth
Oh.
now, but maybe it makes for a good interview catch line.
And you were in for, was it just under 5 weeks?
Well, the sentence was for 5 weeks. I was supposed to stay in 2.5 in the prison, and then 2.5 out on license. But in fact, I was let out just over 2 weeks after serving just over 2 weeks. So
Okay.
that's because they didn't want to keep me in over the weekend and have to pay compensation if I stayed too long. So it was a short sentence, and but an experience certainly.
I bet. I bet. And one that, well, might be repeated.
Well, I'll tell you a bit more about prison. I mean, it's a bureaucracy, really. The prisoners help each other. The wardens do their best, but sometimes they've probably got their hands full. So, you've got to keep being assertive, and sometimes you may not feel assertive. I had an experience of prison last year on remand just for a week, and my medications got all messed up. So I didn't have my Parkinson's meds for about 36 hours. So I knew to be much more assertive this time, and that all went fine. There's supposed to be an in-cell computer where you can book yourself on all sorts of beneficial courses, but the trouble is they didn't work. Everything was broken. So I didn't quite know. I never had an induction, but I used other people's kindness to help me through the mysteries of prison life.
Did you meet the chaplain there?
I did, yes, I did. I couldn't take my Bible in, and I was pretty much prepared for that because they worry about drugs getting into prison in any way, so that you really are stripped of everything you come in with, and books are such a thing. But very quickly the next day, I got a brand new Bible from the Catholic chaplain,
Nice.
and it was very nice too. So I was
Good.
very grateful. And then after about a week, I managed to get some other books to read, which was a treat.
Oh, I bet it was. I bet it was. And of course, you don't have any access to media, do you? Social media?
No, absolutely not.
No.
But of course, that's a health benefit to have a little bit of
Well,
a detox. Um, No, well, there is a sort of benefit there in prison. There is a bit of reflective space, but of course, you're losing a lot of things as well. You lose the freedom as to when you walk, and
Yes.
most importantly, you only get a little time out your cell.
Yeah.
But it was once you've managed to make your phone call to a loved one,
Hmm.
that takes about, well, it took me about 5 days before I could properly have a
Right.
one-to-one
Right.
conversation.
Right.
But they knew where I was, so they weren't
Yes.
worried.
And you were safe and you
I
were
was,
going to be coming out.
that's right.
So I know you've been heavily involved with a number of important humanitarian causes, as you've said, Just Stop Oil, but also including Christian Climate Action and Insulate Britain. There have been a lot of protests going on as well at the moment in general. People protesting about the perceived cruelty at the Grand National and also
Mm.
anti-monarchy at the King's coronation. And I get the feeling, but I don't know if you do, that there's this negative portrayal really of demonstrations that are not violent. And I often wonder, why is this outrage not being directed at the actual root cause of the issues? Do you feel like that as well?
Yes, I can do, but I think for me there's something about doing what needs to be done, and in a way, I think the social science of it is if you cause a disruption and if people start talking about an issue, even if the press, owned by very rich people largely, is not giving you a good press and has its interest in fossil fuels protected. But eventually something gets through. And for example, the Daily Mail is often not the kindest paper, and has
No,
actually, I think it
indeed.
was the Sun that called me an eco idiot. Um, but they often still report what people have said, and I think eventually the people hear what's going on. At least I hope that's the case. And so we are in the middle of social change. I'd prefer to use the word civil resistance. I'm resisting uh,
Mm-hmm.
what is destroying life. I'm resisting um, the economy, the new fossil, specifically new oil and gas and coal uh,
Yes.
projects. That causes more death, more heating, more destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not like I'm standing with a little placard saying, "Please don't
No,
do it."
no.
This is life or death. This is,
Yeah.
it's not an opinion. It's what every human is born to do, is to stand up for the dignity of life and care for their children and as yet unborn grandchildren and so on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um,
And it
or their
is,
beloved pet. It's
yeah, well,
whatever
indeed.
lives and you love and keeps your world going is precious.
I think it's a very consumerist world, isn't it? And even talking to friends, we know there's climate change, and yeah, nobody seems to want to actively do anything to stop that. They're still going off on planes for their holidays and buying like crazy. It's got to be a
Yes,
whole mind switch that people have.
you're right. You're right. I think my advice from experience is don't worry about other people, what they think, but let's act with our own integrity to resist or to stand up for, and let's join with others, because we can't do this on our own. It gets too depressing when you're the only person who
Yeah.
seems to be asking why on earth are we all flying around the world on another cruise fly holiday. Um, but let's stand together, let's resist, and let's find the joy really of standing up for life. It's and that feeds you rather than drives you into despair, because it's too easy to sink into a despair.
And something has got to be done, doesn't it? I guess the driver for you and others is we can't sit back and do nothing. We have to know that we are doing something.
We do, and people really, I'm sure everybody wants face the issue. And of course, it's hard to get round to that point. There are lots of ways to deny it, not say I don't believe it's all a hoax. So some still do that, but to be distracted with the busyness of work, or I'm going to plant some flowers in my garden. That makes me feel better, but it's not really. It's a good thing to do, but it's not going to stop the big structural issues that need to be faced. But gather with others, act in love, courageously, in a group like Just Stop Oil or Insulate Britain, or start one yourselves. Vets against destruction, and then feel the power really. And it began for me a bit, going back a bit about how I got into this. When I was in my first parish in Liverpool, I'd worked in the voluntary sector, but then my first parish, proper parish on my own, where they trusted me with the church, was in Norris Green, which is a big area of housing estates. And the church, called St. Christopher's, was surrounded by security fencing, rather ugly fencing, and it looked like Fort Knox. It was ugly and grim. And the previous vicar had terrible trouble with kids jumping on the roof of the church and so on, and tried to stop that. And at the same time, there was the time of 5 a day, eat your 5 a day vegetables and fruit and vegetables. And there was this idea that a local poet came to me and said, why don't we grow vegetables on the estate where they've knocked down the houses? Well, we pretty soon realized they would have all got trashed by the kids, the antisocial lads and lasses. So we used some of the church grounds to plant raised beds and polytunnels, and then we started a church cafe called the Chatty Church Cafe, and we made soup out of the carrots, though they were very small. So that was great fun. And I think that, along with the bishop who had been on a sabbatical and was reflecting on the environment and Jesus, had written a book, Bishop James Jones, Jesus and the Earth. So that helped me think about my faith in context with the changing climate, and what it meant for me to be a Christian and a priest at this time in history. But it still took me some time to work it all out and to step into that road in London in 2021.
Yes, I bet. Oh, what a great beginning, though.
Yeah, it feels like a privilege. I think we are privileged in the West, because although the laws are getting a bit stricter, we still have freedom to protest, and we have a civil society that works. So it's just a matter of finding some friends to do it with. And
yes, and it's definitely it's on the news. I mean, virtually every day there is something about the climate, which I think is absolutely wonderful. Well, it's not good, but we're hearing about all these heat waves and terrible weather, and I think people are realizing, you can't just bury your head in the sand anymore about this. It's happening everywhere.
Absolutely, it is happening, and we create our own hope. Who was the saint who said, God has no hands on earth but yours, no feet, but it's that we are. It's terrifying. I wish we didn't have to do this, and we could just I could dream of sit in my potting shed all day long, but
we can say things in our own small way, because I know people have been saying to me from work, oh, this weather's absolutely wonderful, isn't it? And I always say it is, but it isn't right for this time of the year to have such high temperatures.
It's not. I know. It's scary. My wife's Australian, and her hometown, they've had bushfires a few years ago, but recently it's been flooded endlessly, which is unheard of. So we've all had this weird weather.
And what do you think about other countries and how they treat these peaceful protesters? Is there anything we can learn from other countries in the UK?
Well, I think we're learning some bad things, perhaps. the most recent bill, there was a public order bill, and there was something before it. We're getting now to be a bit more like some countries which have poor human rights. So that's quite worrying. I think the media is key. And let me talk a bit about the sorry. When I was on trial, there was quite a lot of talk about the right of a jury to follow its conscience. This is a well-established right, and so that freedom to follow your conscience is important. I told you earlier the offence was the willful obstruction of the highway. It's known as the public highway, and indeed everybody has a right to protest on the highway. But a lot of the new legislation is sort of squeezing out these rights and framing all the protesters as something bad in itself. I think people know that's not true, but we've got to. Some people are very keen to protect our laws and our rights. There's a new group called Lawyers Are Responsible, which has been really encouraging. A group of lawyers, and they've been signing a letter. You can find it on the internet, and they are undertaking not to take work from fossil fuel companies establishing new oil and gas contracts, and also to not protest the climate protesters, because it's costing the state, costing your listeners a fortune to take me and others through courts into prison, and to probably delay other people getting justice. So it's a misuse, I think, of the law. I studied law. It's not widely
I didn't
known.
know that. No.
And I escaped from the law to become a vicar. Much better career, but I still fancy myself as a bit of an amateur lawyer, I think.
Was there a particular area you were interested in the law?
I don't think there is anything that would captivate me in the law, but I do. I think we all have to become amateur lawyers in this game, and so I'm now becoming an expert on injunctions.
Right. Okay.
So it's not just the criminal law, but the civil law is chasing us. And
yes,
as I speak to you, behind me there are shelves full of stacks and stacks of paper from various government agencies. So
yes, you need to get on top of that as well, don't you? So you have been in prison, and you've still vowed to continue protesting despite the charges brought against you. But what do you think is the next step in the fight against climate change crisis? What do you think is going to take before it becomes an agenda that the government and the average person on the street will take seriously?
I think it's all about us. It's really about us individuals and what we do. We can't leave it to anyone else. And I don't know about you, but friends often sort of talk about the policy of this party or that party, and there seems to be a bit of a change there. And there's been this article in the paper, and isn't that good? And today, Lord, is he Debden, the chair of the Climate Change Committee, John Gummer, has come out and said that, of course, the government shouldn't be investing in new oil and gas projects. But whatever the good news is, I don't think it gets any of us off the hook. It just needs lots of us to act. And although retired vicars are a very special and wonderful breed of human being, please don't leave it to people like me. You know, it needs all ages, all sorts, to lovingly disrupt our business as usual that is taking us down the slippery slope, which is getting ever more slippery. So, but we can stop. Human beings can do wonderful things. I mean, in horrible situations like in the Second World War, deciding not to build cars but to build tanks, although tanks are horrible things, but you can defend yourself against big threats.
Yes.
So human beings are capable of great things, and it feels to me like we're trapped in like idolatry, to use that religious idea. You know,
Mhm.
we're obsessed, we're bewitched by fossil fuels and the economy as it is. But new economies are available. Other ways of living are
Mhm.
certainly there, and could be better in all sorts of ways.
Yep. We have to keep trying and have hope, don't we?
We do.
So just shifting slightly, I know you've also done work with Age Concern, and that was in the 1980s. And I think that probably shaped your view about the way in which the government is failing the most vulnerable people in society. That was way back in the 1980s.
Yes,
But it's still an issue, isn't it? Very
it
much
is an
so.
issue. Yes. So when I came across Insulate Britain with this focus on the practical step of insulating housing, all social housing to be well insulated, because that would be a most efficient way of cutting carbon emissions dramatically. If you think about it, poor people and older people living in poor quality housing, particularly in the private sector, uh, paying a lot for their fuel, and then the heat is gushing out the roofs and the windows, and you know they're in debt because of it all. So that's just nonsense. Good for the profits of the companies, but not good for people. And so when I realized that thousands of people were still dying each year from this, around 8,000 we
Mhm.
reckoned in that year, um, and then lots of others in debt and getting other health related
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
It's both a social and a climate no-brainer. It's you just got to act, but still we don't do it. It's unthinkable. Why would one not do it?
No.
Um,
And I think it's John Bird is the editor of The Big Issue, and
mm,
he mentions that a lot.
good,
Poverty,
yes,
trying to cure poverty in society will just have so many benefits across so many areas. And of course,
that's
climate
true.
change affects the most vulnerable, as you said, not only in this country, but in other countries further afield,
Uh,
with floods, etc.
Well, we can't have policies that make people poor. We certainly should not have policies that make people sick or
No.
die, and we cannot have policies that push us over those tipping points. You know, push us down the slippery slope, so it
Mm.
becomes the ball is running away and you can't stop it. And we have the knowledge and we have the power. Why would the government have murderous policies like that? Because that's what they are. If you're doing
Mm.
something that you know causes harm, that degree of harm, it
Yeah.
that the government should be in the court, not me.
Well, yes, yes. I've heard that said. You know, some people who are murderers,
And
versus those who know they are doing willful wrong and who should know better and are well educated and well. But yeah, that's another huge topic.
it is why is a mystery, but yes, it is unthinkable, unimaginable, but
Yeah,
and yet it's happening.
yeah.
You have to pinch yourself, but it's true.
So what about your journey into priesthood? So you started off as a lawyer, which I didn't know, but what made you change paths?
I think when I started the law degree, but I think I knew pretty early on it wasn't for me. I didn't come from a particularly religious family. There was church around. My mum was more spiritual, I think, than my
Mhm.
dad, and she had quite a nature-loving spirituality,
Okay.
which I think I imbibed a bit of. And I think it was just seeing. I guess I had the Christian stories, and it was the church was there, but there were just moments when it became quite life enhancing and
Right.
life changing. And I think it's like a storehouse of great spiritual practices and great stories and great words. And yeah, I just can't shake it off. So my career started in Age Concern and then other voluntary organizations, but I couldn't quite get rid of the idea of Jesus and somehow wanting to be part of that. I the church is a terribly frustrating place at times, as you may know.
Well, that's why I'm eternally grateful that I'm still in secular employment.
Well, good
It's a
for you.
beast of an organization sometimes, isn't
It
it?
can be, yes, but still, you know, it's given me the space to explore what Jesus means and what
Yes.
stories are relevant today, and it gives me I'm forever grateful for the power and peace that comes from it.
And there's a breadth of difference across the Church of England as well, isn't
Yes,
there?
it is a wonderful, variegated thing.
So I know that if we just come back to your time in prison again, because you wrote this beautiful article for Christian Climate Change Action about your experience, and your faith, I'm sure, was very, very important to you at that challenging time.
It was really, yes. I felt, I mean, going back before prison and before the trial, I was, you know, I'm frightened like anybody, and thinking I can't do this, and full of doubt and full of hesitation, you know, and so that's how I've been so much of the time. And then I get together with other people who understand what's going on, and then you've got the lovely Christians in Christian Climate Action and that community. So strength has come from that, and then as you act and pray and reflect, and it felt so right. It felt like I just had to. If I went backwards thinking, well, I have to look after yourself, Mark, look after number one, then I just felt miserable.
Yeah.
So to act while you're still alive is a great gift. So that was that. But in prison, I never felt at risk. I always felt safe. I always felt cared for, both spiritually and humanly as well, really. And there was the privilege of being able to talk to other people in all sorts of terrifying situations and listen to them. So yeah, God never quite abandoned me. Hasn't yet.
No, no. I'm sure he won't. So you do so many things. You are retired, but you are so wrapped up in these humanitarian causes. Do you have any spare time to do anything different and just
It
chill?
it does rather take over. But I get weary like anyone else, and I need to rest. And I'm going on a retreat next week
Oh, nice.
to a monastery for 4 days, so that's nice. I like to read. I like to eat and talk to friends, and so simple pleasures. I went for a long walk yesterday with a much fitter retired vicar than me, and he took me for miles. That was good. And
Oh, excellent.
so you folk who are working like you, Jenny, you know, but once you're retired, there's a bit of space to.
Oh, yes, there will be definitely plenty of things to do. I do like well, I would like to do more in the environmental side of things. Obviously, I'm on social media and I put up posts about it.
Well, I think it's
Talk about
fantastic
it.
what you're doing. I really do. Well, there's so often doctors and GPs in various actions. You know, I saw a picture today. If only we could get the vets together. You could lead the vets, and
Yeah. Well, there are certainly more vets involved in green initiatives and looking at the ways that their practices work, and encouraging people, to use better chemicals,
yes.
safety as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, do you remember when there was the Australian bushfires about three?
Oh,
And
yes, all those
the
poor
number of
animals.
animals that they reckoned had died was
Yeah,
unthinkable,
phenomenal.
wasn't
I know.
it?
Horrible.
So I think our perception is slowly opening up as people, you know, into the suffering isn't climate is not an abstract thing. This is about the life we are part of, you know, this sacred, beautiful world, this.
Yes. And more big charities and organizations coming together.
Yes.
That will be the way to
It
help
will.
move
But
people.
every one of your listeners is important in this. We all are. And don't despair. You don't
No.
have to go to prison, but there are other things you can do.
Well, that is very, very inspiring. I was going to say to you what's next. You may not be allowed to reveal that, but
Well, I've got a probation officer who came to visit me today to check I did live where I'd said I live. And I've told her and I've told the judge I will protest again, but I haven't said when or where. So, and I don't think I know yet. But there are lots of ways for us to resist this craziness, and lots of ways to do it without getting arrested. So be encouraged and find out more.
Absolutely. Well, that is very, very encouraging to me, and I'm sure all of our listeners as well. So I always say at the end of these that, you know, I've never been to prison, but maybe I should try it. I don't know if I'm going to say that today, but maybe at some point in the future.
Well, I must just tell you one other thing. I had so many cards in prison, letters and cards and emails. It's been absolutely overpowering. So there's a lot of joy and
Lots of
laughter.
people thinking
Lots
of
of love.
you and
Yeah,
praying for you. Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. Well, I personally think you're doing a marvelous job, and you're an inspiration. And I wish you all the very best for the future. And I know what you're doing is definitely going to have an impact on the future. And those of us listening need to be brave and think of ways that we can get involved in this as well. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Jenny.